Society preaches that pouring your entire soul into your children is the ultimate, untouchable investment. They tell you that blood is an unbreakable covenant, a permanent sanctuary designed to shelter you when the harsh winters of old age finally arrive. What they conveniently, deliberately leave out is a much darker, far more common truth. Sometimes, the very people who share your DNA are simply standing in your shadow, patiently waiting for you to collapse so they can pick your bones completely clean. I did not learn this terrifying lesson in one explosive, dramatic moment. It did not strike me like a sudden bolt of lightning. It arrived in quiet, insidious pieces, microscopic fractures in trust that I actively found reasons to ignore. Because I was 68 years old, grieving the loss of my wife, and desperately trying to keep the fractured remains of my family together. My son's name is Julian. For 34 years, I truly thought he was a good man. I thought I had raised a son of honor. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am 68 years old. I have worked my entire life as a master carpenter and a custom woodworker. I spent 40 long years coming home with sawdust in my lungs and wood stain permanently etched under my fingernails. I'm a remarkably simple man. I drive a rusted 1998 Ford F-150. I wear faded flannel shirts. I live a quiet, unassuming life in the Chicago suburbs. To my brand new daughter-in-law, Vanessa, I was just a broke, uneducated, blue-collar laborer. I was a stain on her meticulously curated, high-society aesthetic. What she did not know was the actual, heavily guarded state of my finances. She had absolutely no idea that my late wife, Clara, came from a very old, very quiet, and incredibly wealthy dynasty. Clara and I lived simply by choice, never by necessity. We built a life on hard work, not on trust funds. But Vanessa only saw the surface. She only saw a tired old man holding a hammer. Just 7 days ago, exactly 1 week prior to the darkest moment of my life, I had paid $150,000 in cold, hard cash to fund the extravagant, over-the-top wedding that Vanessa absolutely demanded. She wanted a royal coronation. She demanded ice sculptures, imported French silk, a 10-piece live orchestra, and a custom designer gown. I paid for all of it. I did not complain. I emptied a significant portion of my visible liquid savings because my son, Julian, sat in my kitchen and begged me to. He said it would make her happy. He said it would start his new tech startup life on the right foot. And now, exactly 7 days later, his new bride was standing in the center of my living room, demanding I sign away the roof over my head. "Arthur," Vanessa said. Her voice was dripping with a thick, artificial syrup of fake concern. "Julian and I have been talking. We're just so worried about you living in this old, drafty house all by yourself. Your health is not what it used to be. This property is simply too much physical work for you." I looked up at her from my worn armchair. I kept my face completely blank. "My health is perfectly fine, Vanessa," I replied evenly. "I chop my own firewood. I build my own furniture. I am perfectly capable." She waved her hand dismissively, fluttering her expensive manicured fingers as if my words were just the babbling of a confused, senile child. "Well, you know how things can change at your age," she countered smoothly. "One day you are fine. The next day you fall down the stairs and break your hip. Julian and I decided that we need to step in and start managing your assets for you. It is the responsible, loving thing to do." She pulled a thick legal document from her designer bag. "We found a lovely, state-run assisted living facility just outside the city limits," she continued. "It is very affordable. But before we can get you moved in, we need to transfer the deed of this house into our names. That way, we can sell it, use the funds to cover your basic care, and invest whatever is left over for our future family." I felt the air leave my lungs. A nursing home? A cheap, underfunded state facility? She was standing in the home I had shared with my wife for 40 years, casually telling me she was going to lock me away in a sterile room and take the profits from my house to fund her luxurious lifestyle. I slowly shifted my gaze away from Vanessa. I looked toward the hallway. Julian had walked in shortly after her. He was 34 years old. He was wearing a sharp, tailored business casual outfit, holding a cup of artisan coffee he had bought on the way over. He was my son, the boy I had taught to swing a hammer, the boy whose expensive tech college tuition I had paid in full. Julian was leaning against the doorframe. He absolutely refused to make eye contact with me. He was staring intensely at the screen of his smartphone, aggressively scrolling, pretending he was completely isolated from the cruel, monstrous conversation happening right in front of him. "Julian," I said. My voice was low. It carried a heavy, aching weight. "Are you hearing this? Are you a part of this?" Julian shifted his weight uncomfortably. He finally glanced up, but his eyes darted quickly away from mine, landing firmly on the hardwood floorboards I had installed by hand. "Dad, come on. Be reasonable," he mumbled. "Vanessa is right. You're getting older. We have to think about the future. It is just a piece of paper. It makes things easier for everyone. Easier for them." That was exactly what he meant. Get comfortable. This story is going to take you somewhere incredibly dark and deeply satisfying. Hit that like button to bring a little sunshine to this father's heart. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching this video from right now. Trust me, you're going to love this. Asterisk. The tension in my living room skyrocketed. The silence grew incredibly thick. A nervous man in a cheap gray suit stepped out from behind Julian. He was holding a leather briefcase. It was a hired notary. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly realizing he had just walked into the middle of a massive, ugly family betrayal. "Sir," the notary said quietly, clearing his throat, "I just need to verify your identification and witness your signature on the lines marked with the red tabs." Vanessa stepped closer to the coffee table. She tapped her long fingernail aggressively against the quitclaim deed. "Just sign it, Arthur," she snapped. The fake sweetness was rapidly evaporating. "We have a lot of investor meetings to run today. We do not have time to sit here and argue with you. You know you cannot take care of yourself anymore. We're doing you a massive favor." I looked at the heavy gold pen resting on the paperwork. I looked at the legal document that would officially strip me of my primary residence. I looked at the daughter-in-law who viewed me as nothing more than a disposable stepping stone. And finally, I looked at the son who had completely surrendered his moral compass. He was allowing his wife to throw his grieving father out into the freezing street just days after I had financed the most important day of his life. My heart hammered in my chest. A deep, burning anger started to ignite in the pit of my stomach. But I knew that exploding in rage would not help me. Yelling and screaming would only give Vanessa the exact ammunition she needed to prove I was emotionally unstable. I needed to be smart. I needed to be highly strategic. I took a slow, deep breath, steadying my racing pulse. I reached my right hand out toward the gold pen. I commanded my muscles to shake. I let my fingers tremble violently, putting on the perfect performance of a broken, defeated, terrified old man. "Well?" Vanessa snapped. She crossed her arms over her chest. "We are waiting, Arthur. The notary charges by the hour." I touched the cold metal of the pen. I clumsily pushed it off the edge of the table. It tumbled through the air and landed silently on the woven rug near my scuffed boots. "Oh, I'm so incredibly sorry," I stammered. I kept my head bowed low to hide the sharp, calculated focus burning in my eyes. My hand is just shaking so badly today. I cannot seem to grip anything right now. My chest feels terribly tight. I need a minute to calm my nerves. Julian groaned in deep frustration. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "You are absolutely impossible, Dad," he muttered angrily. I placed my hands flat on my knees. I looked directly into Julian's eyes. "I am not signing this document today," I said clearly. "It is my home. I need to take these documents to the local parish attorney down the street. I will have him review every single page. We can discuss this next week." The tense silence shattered instantly. Vanessa let out a sharp, mocking laugh, throwing her hands up in pure disbelief. "Next week?" She scoffed loudly. "We do not have until next week. You are signing that paper right now." Julian stormed across the living room. He closed the distance between us in 3 aggressive strides. He violently snatched the stack of documents off the coffee table, crumpling the pages in his furious grip. "You are so unbelievably selfish," Julian screamed. His loud voice echoed sharply off the wooden walls. We were trying to build a wealthy, successful future for my startup, and you are purposefully dragging us down into the mud. If you walk out that door, if you stubbornly refuse to sign this deed today, you are completely dead to me. Do you hear me? You are dead to me." He stepped even closer, towering over me with pure, unadulterated malice. "If you refuse, I will personally call the police," Julian threatened, his voice dropping into a harsh, cruel command. "I will tell them you are suffering from severe dementia, that you are a danger to my wife. They will drag you out of here and lock you in a state psychiatric ward for an involuntary evaluation. Once you're declared mentally incompetent, taking your assets will be incredibly easy. Sign the paper, Dad." The sheer ruthlessness of his plan was staggering. He had thought of everything. I did not argue. I did not beg. "I understand your terms, Julian," I said quietly. I stood up. I walked slowly toward the hall closet. I pulled out a battered, scuffed leather suitcase. I packed 3 faded flannel shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, and my heavy work boots. I did not look back. I did not offer a single apology. I walked out the front door into the freezing Chicago air. I played the part of the tragic, abandoned father with absolute, flawless perfection. I heard the deadbolt lock securely behind me. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully eliminated their biggest obstacle by violently kicking me out into the street. What those arrogant fools completely failed to realize was that they hadn't just kicked out a helpless old carpenter. They had just declared war on a man who had already rigged the entire battlefield with explosives. I walked slowly down the paved driveway toward my rusted 1998 Ford pickup truck. The winter chill seeped through my thin canvas jacket, but I barely noticed the dropping temperature. I hoisted my battered suitcase into the rusted bed of the truck. I climbed heavily into the driver's seat and pulled the heavy door shut. I inserted the metal key into the ignition. The old engine roared to life with a familiar, comforting rumble. As I shifted the gear into drive and pulled away from my own home, my entire physical posture drastically transformed. The heavy, tragic slouch instantly evaporated. I straightened my back against the worn leather seat. I rolled my shoulders. I took a deep, steadying breath. I looked into the rearview mirror, watching the lights of my house slowly fade into the dark shadows. I did not shed a single tear for the son I had lost. I felt an incredible surge of pure, relentless energy coursing through my veins. A slow, incredibly cold smile spread across my weathered face. Julian and Vanessa genuinely believed they had won. They were probably already popping expensive champagne in my kitchen. But my battered, tattered suitcase did not just contain a few folded flannel shirts. Hidden securely beneath the false fabric lining of that scuffed leather bag was a heavily encrypted, high-capacity master computer server. For the past 4 weeks, that silent, spinning drive had been actively receiving and permanently recording high-definition audio and video feeds from 6 microscopic, state-of-the-art security cameras I had quietly and expertly installed in the crown molding of every primary room in my house. I knew exactly what they were going to do, because I had intentionally planted the exact bait they were currently hunting for. I drove through the frost-covered streets, leaving the suburbs behind as the glittering, towering skyline of downtown Chicago began to rise in the distance. I did not drive to a cheap motel. Instead, I navigated my rusted truck into the pristine, brightly lit underground parking garage of the most exclusive 5-star hotel in the financial district. The valet attendant blinked in absolute surprise at my grease-stained boots and worn coat. But his hesitation vanished the exact moment I handed him a heavy, solid metal black credit card. It was an invitation-only account tied directly to Clara's heavily guarded private trust. It offered a practically limitless ceiling. I bypassed the main reception desk and took the private elevator straight to the top floor. The mahogany doors opened into a breathtaking penthouse suite featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the icy, black waters of Lake Michigan. I dropped my suitcase onto the plush designer rug. I walked straight to the expensive glass dining table. I pulled a sleek laptop from a hidden compartment in my bag. I plugged in the encrypted master hard drive. The computer screen flickered to life. I confidently launched the secure surveillance software. Within seconds, a grid of 6 high-definition video feeds populated my screen, displaying the rooms inside my home in real time. I sat back in a leather chair. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I focused my attention entirely on the lower right quadrant of the screen. The camera was perfectly positioned in my damp, unfinished basement. Before my exit, I had purposely left behind several heavy cardboard boxes labeled with thick black marker, marked as my personal financial records and old tax returns. I knew their arrogant champagne celebration would not last long. Greed is a restless disease. Soon enough, they would be frantically hunting for the deeds and bank statements they needed to officially seize my net worth. Sure enough, 2 hours after I walked out the front door, the basement door swung open. The harsh fluorescent overhead lights flickered on. Julian and Vanessa quickly and eagerly sprinted down the wooden stairs. They abandoned their crystal champagne flutes for the frantic work of scavenging through an old man's private life. Watching them through the crystal-clear digital feed was a profoundly disturbing experience. They behaved like starving animals tearing into a fresh carcass. Vanessa dropped to her knees. She aggressively ripped the packing tape off the first cardboard box. She began tossing decades of my life carelessly over her shoulder. Old family photo albums, faded birthday card from when Julian was a little boy, and bundles of heartfelt love letters I had written to Clara were dumped carelessly onto the dirty concrete floor. She did not pause to look at a single photograph. She was blindly hunting for bank statements. Julian was right beside her, ripping through a stack of old utility bills. He was sweating heavily, muttering angry curses under his breath every time a file folder turned out to be completely empty and useless. I patiently watched the glowing screen, waiting for the inevitable moment. It took them nearly an hour of frantic, exhausted searching. Vanessa let out a frustrated groan as she dumped the final stack of papers onto the floor. A bright red folder slid out from the pile, landing directly at Julian's feet. He wiped the sweat from his forehead. He slowly reached down to pick it up. I leaned closer to my laptop screen, my heart beating in a steady, measured rhythm. Julian opened the red folder. He began scanning the bold black text on the first page. I watched his eyes widen dramatically. His mouth fell open in a silent gasp. He grabbed Vanessa by the shoulder, shaking her aggressively, and shoved the document into her hands. Vanessa's eyes darted rapidly across the page. The exhaustion vanished from her face, instantly replaced by a wicked, triumphant, ear-to-ear grin. She let out a sharp, joyful scream, throwing her arms around Julian's neck. They jumped up and down in the middle of the ruined basement. They had found exactly what I wanted them to find. It was an outdated medical power of attorney. 3 years prior, I had been admitted to the hospital for a sudden emergency appendix surgery. Hospital protocol required me to designate a legal proxy to make healthcare decisions on my behalf. I had to sign those rights to my son. The document explicitly granted Julian specific, highly limited authority over my physical healthcare directives for a duration of exactly 30 days. After I recovered, the document legally expired. It was completely void and entirely useless. I had tossed it into a basement box and forgotten about it until I needed the perfect lure for my trap. As I watched them dance around the basement, clutching the expired document, I knew exactly what was racing through their greedy, twisted minds. To a desperate, uneducated thief, a single piece of paper with an official legal seal looked exactly like a golden ticket to unlimited wealth. They just needed to alter it. The next morning, at exactly 9 a.m., the heavy front doorbell rang. The camera angle in the dining room shifted slightly. The front door opened, revealing the same nervous man in the cheap gray suit who had stood in my living room yesterday. The corrupt notary. He scurried inside, glancing over his shoulder. Vanessa led him straight to the dining room table where the red folder was already waiting. I leaned closer to the screen, turning up the audio feed to catch every single detail. Julian placed the old medical power of attorney on the table. He pointed to the specific paragraphs that restricted his authority to hospital decisions. He told the notary that they needed those restrictions completely removed. The notary hesitated nervously. He tapped his fingers against his leather briefcase. He explained that altering a legally binding document after the fact was a severe federal offense. He warned them that if the banks scrutinized the paperwork, they would all be facing serious jail time. Vanessa did not flinch. She simply walked over to her designer handbag. She pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills and dropped them directly in front of the sweating man. "There is $20,000 in that stack," Vanessa stated coldly. "You can walk away, or you can do your job." I watched as greed instantly overpowered the notary's fear. He stared at the cash for a long moment, then reached out and pulled it into his briefcase. For the next hour, I watched a masterclass in absolute criminal desperation. They carefully scanned my original document into his laptop. They meticulously deleted the word medical from the header, replacing it with the heavy, sweeping terminology of a general durable power of attorney. They completely erased the restrictive clauses, typing in new, sweeping paragraphs that granted Julian absolute, unchecked authority over all my real estate, bank accounts, and investment portfolios. The most sickening part was watching them forge my signature. Julian practiced tracing my handwriting on a scrap piece of paper for 20 minutes. He laughed quietly to himself as he perfected the forgery. When he felt confident, he signed the bottom of the newly minted, completely fraudulent document. The corrupt notary pressed his official metal stamp into the paper, permanently sealing their monumental crime with the illusion of government authenticity. With the forged document completely finished, Vanessa began pacing around the dining room table. Her eyes were wide with frantic, greedy energy. She laid out the magnificent master stroke of her wicked scheme. "We are not going to waste time dealing with traditional commercial banks," Vanessa told Julian. "They require extensive background checks and weeks of underwriting. They might even insist on speaking to your father directly." Instead, Vanessa revealed her brilliant shortcut. She had already been in contact with an aggressive, predatory hard money lender. These shadow syndicates did not care about credit scores. They only cared about massive, undeniable collateral. "We are going to use this forged power of attorney to pledge the Pacific Northwest property as collateral for an immediate, high-interest cash loan," Vanessa explained gleefully. Julian's eyes widened in awe. "How much are we asking for?" $8 million, Vanessa whispered. The words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. She explained that $8 million in immediate liquid cash would be more than enough to completely fund Julian's failing tech startup and their brand new luxury lifestyle. "But what happens when the loan defaults?" Julian asked nervously. "That is the best part," Vanessa smirked. "Because the lender thinks your senile father took out the loan, they will just assume he defaulted. The ruthless private lender will aggressively seize the island property and liquidate it. He loses the land, and we're sitting on a beach with $8 million in stolen, untraceable cash." I sat in the dark luxury of my penthouse suite. I watched their disgusting, triumphant embrace through the monitor. The island they were planning to fraudulently mortgage was a breathtaking 1,000-acre private sanctuary in the Pacific Northwest. It was Clara's ultimate inheritance, valued at over $25 million. I did not feel a single ounce of panic. I did not reach for my phone to warn them or to stop them from walking off the cliff. They had willingly, eagerly chosen to cross the line from disrespectful children into federal criminals. They had just manufactured the exact rope they needed to hang themselves. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. A calm, deeply satisfied feeling settled over my chest. The trap was perfectly set. Now all I had to do was wait for the jaws to snap shut. The very next morning, the heavy, isolating silence of my penthouse suite was shattered by the sharp ringing of my cell phone. The caller identification displayed Marcus Sterling's name. I answered immediately. I was expecting the precise, catastrophic update we had been anticipating. "Arthur," Marcus said. His voice was unusually tight. It carried an undeniable edge of professional urgency. They actually did it. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of these two is almost difficult to comprehend. Marcus explained that his automated legal monitoring software had just triggered a massive, glowing red flag across his firm's network. The aggressive, hard money lender Vanessa had contacted was moving with unprecedented, terrifying speed. They had already pulled the preliminary title report for the Pacific Northwest Island. They had officially filed a binding, commercial lien against the estate. They completely accepted the forged durable power of attorney as absolute fact, Marcus explained, his tone laced with disbelief. Because this lender is a private, predatory institution that thrives on rapid, high-interest transactions, they completely bypassed the rigorous underwriting processes that a traditional commercial bank would legally require. They did not verify the signature with you. They saw a pristine, unencumbered $25 million island, and their greed matched Vanessa's perfectly. Marcus was pacing in his New York office. I could hear the rhythmic clicking of his expensive leather shoes against his hardwood floor. "Arthur, we need to act this very second," Marcus stated firmly, shifting into his aggressive, predatory legal mode. "I have an emergency federal injunction already drafted. It is sitting right here on my desk. If I file this motion with the federal court right now, we can instantly freeze the entire transaction before a single dollar moves across state lines." He took a sharp breath. "We can halt the mortgage process. We can lock down the property title. We can immediately alert the federal authorities. Julian and Vanessa have officially committed wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and severe real estate fraud. We can have the FBI waiting at their front door before the sun goes down today. They will be arrested in handcuffs, and your wife's island will remain completely untouched." The proposition was incredibly tempting. I could end the nightmare right then and there. I could send federal agents to drag my son out of his house, putting an abrupt, humiliating halt to his agonizing betrayal. But as I stared out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the freezing, gray waters of Lake Michigan, a profound, chilling calmness washed over my entire body. I thought about the absolute cruelty in Julian's eyes when he threatened to banish me to a miserable psychiatric ward. I thought about Vanessa gleefully tossing my wife's love letters onto a dirty concrete floor. If I stopped them right now, before the money actually changed hands, they would hire slimy, high-priced defense attorneys. They would cry in front of a judge. They would claim it was a terrible, tragic family misunderstanding. They might even try to blame the corrupt notary entirely, claiming they had absolutely no idea the document was illegally altered. I could not allow them a single inch of room to escape the consequences of their wicked actions. "No, Marcus," I said smoothly. My voice was as cold as the winter wind outside my window. "Do not file the injunction. Do not alert the authorities. And absolutely do not freeze the transaction. Let the lender finalize the paperwork." Marcus stopped pacing. The line fell completely, heavily silent for a long moment. "Arthur," he finally responded, his tone laced with genuine, deep concern. "If we do not stop this right now, that predatory lender is going to wire $8 million directly into your son's personal checking account. They're going to place a massive, legally binding encumbrance on Clara's generational land. You are allowing a monumental financial crime to be completely executed against your own estate." "I know exactly what I am doing," I replied with absolute, unshakable certainty. "If we stop the transaction today, it remains an attempted crime. They will fight it. They will lie their way out of a severe punishment." I gripped the edge of the glass table. "But if we let the lender wire that $8 million into their account, the crime is fully, irreversibly completed. The theft is undeniably executed across federal lines. And more importantly, Marcus, I want them to spend it." "You want them to spend stolen syndicate money?" Marcus asked, stunned. "I want them to touch the money," I commanded. "I want them to use it. I want them to become completely, hopelessly dependent on it. Let them taste the luxurious life they are so desperate to steal. Let them build their entire, fragile kingdom on a foundation of absolute fraud. When the ground finally crumbles beneath their feet, I want them to have absolutely nothing left to hold on to." Marcus let out a slow, heavy breath. I could hear the deep respect and profound understanding settling into his response. "It is a brilliant, terrifying strategy, Arthur," he admitted quietly. "I will monitor the wire transfer. The moment the funds hit their account, the trap is officially locked. We will wait for your signal to drop the hammer." I ended the call. I set the phone down on the glass table. The heavy feeling of anticipation settled in my chest. I poured myself another glass of sparkling water. I turned my attention back to the glowing surveillance monitors. The true test of a man's character is not how he behaves when he is broke. It is how he behaves when he is suddenly, inexplicably handed ultimate power. I was about to watch my son fail that test in the most spectacular way imaginable. Over the next 3 weeks, I remained hidden in the luxurious, silent isolation of my penthouse suite. I quietly observed the spectacular, arrogant downfall of my own flesh and blood. I watched their daily activities through the hidden security cameras. I closely monitored their highly public, incredibly boastful social media accounts. The transformation was both fascinating and entirely sickening to witness. Just 2 days after my conversation with Marcus, the $8 million successfully cleared into their joint checking account. The explosion of their greedy, lavish spending was immediate. It was completely shameless. I watched through the glowing screen of my laptop as they laughed hysterically in their living room, violently tossing designer shopping bags onto the sofa. They behaved like lottery winners who had completely lost their minds. Vanessa immediately went to a high-end luxury car dealership. She purchased a brand new, custom-ordered Porsche Panamera. She paid completely in stolen cash. She proudly posted a dozen pictures of herself leaning against the metallic hood of the sports car, holding the keys up to the camera with a massive, triumphant grin. Her caption read, "Asterisk hard work always pays off. Building our empire, asterisk." Julian was no better. He went on a massive shopping spree. He bought a collection of expensive, imported Patek Philippe watches that cost more than my entire lifetime of carpentry wages. He paraded them on his wrist, taking extreme close-up photographs to ensure everyone in his elite social circle knew exactly how much wealth he had supposedly acquired. He funneled $2 million of the stolen cash directly into his failing tech startup. He proudly announced to the business press that he had successfully secured Series B funding from a private equity firm. He had the absolute audacity to boast about his financial genius in long, rambling video posts, praising his own sharp business acumen. They booked spontaneous, first-class flights to tropical resorts. They drank premium cocktails on pristine white sand beaches. It was entirely nauseating to witness such profound hypocrisy displayed so openly. They were completely blinded by their own arrogance. They paraded around the city acting like untouchable billionaires who had successfully conquered the world. They genuinely believed they had outsmarted a clueless, old blue-collar laborer. They thought they had perfectly executed the ultimate crime without leaving a single trace of evidence behind. They were so intoxicated by the smell of stolen money that they failed to see the monumental, catastrophic danger looming just over the horizon. But dealing with a shadow banking syndicate comes with immediate, terrifying strings attached. By the end of the 3rd week, the private hard money lender began demanding proof of the commercial development Julian had promised in his fraudulent loan application. The syndicate did not hand out $8 million for sports cars and watches. They handed it out under the strict condition that the island was being developed into a high-yield luxury eco-resort. I watched the panic briefly flicker across Julian's face on the living room camera. He was on the phone with the syndicate's aggressive representatives. They demanded a physical site inspection. Vanessa, ever the ambitious manipulator, quickly devised a plan. "We will host a groundbreaking ceremony," she declared, pacing across the living room. "We will fly the syndicate representatives and our wealthy tech investors out to the island. We will hire a heavy demolition crew. We will show them that we are actively breaking ground on the resort. It will buy us the time we need to secure more funding." It was a staggering, utterly delusional gamble. They were planning to bring heavy commercial machinery to a pristine, untouched island they did not legally own. I watched Vanessa eagerly unroll massive architectural blueprints across the dining room table. She pointed to the dense pine forest she planned to clear-cut. She pointed to the exact spot where she intended to pour a concrete helicopter pad. The time for silent observation was officially over. I closed my laptop. I unplugged the encrypted master hard drive. I packed my faded flannel shirts back into my scuffed leather suitcase. I left my Chicago penthouse and flew quietly to the Pacific Northwest, arriving 2 full days ahead of their scheduled invasion. The morning air on the island was incredibly crisp. It bit gently in my cheeks with the refreshing, clean chill of the ocean. Clara's generational island was nothing short of a breathtaking masterpiece painted by nature itself. Towering emerald pine trees framed the expansive, rocky coastline. The distant, snow-capped peaks of the mainland pierced the bright, endless blue sky. The crashing waves of the Pacific Ocean bubbled gently over smooth stones, providing a continuous, peaceful melody. It was a place of profound, sacred peace. There was only one structure on the entire 1,000-acre island. A simple, rustic, hand-built wooden cabin that Clara and I had constructed decades ago. I sat in a heavy, hand-carved wooden rocking chair on the sweeping front porch of that cabin. I was wearing my favorite faded flannel shirt and my scuffed leather work boots. I held a simple ceramic mug of steaming black coffee in my hands, letting the soothing warmth seep into my calloused palms. The profound silence of the vast wilderness was incredibly therapeutic. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. I breathed in the fresh scent of the pine needles. I felt Clara's comforting presence surrounding me. I knew the tranquility was about to be violently shattered, but I felt absolutely no fear. I was simply waiting for the inevitable arrival of the storm I had carefully, meticulously orchestrated. Right on schedule, the sacred mountain silence was violently shattered. The distant, aggressive blast of a heavy marine horn echoed across the icy waters of the Pacific. A massive, commercial transport ferry cut through the thick morning fog. It was moving steadily toward the pristine, rocky shoreline of the island. I did not move from my wooden rocking chair. I merely opened my eyes. I watched the mechanical invasion force approach. The heavy steel ramp of the ferry crashed down onto the pebble beach. The harsh, mechanical roar of heavy diesel engines violently disrupted the tranquility of the ancient forest. 5 massive, bright yellow bulldozers and heavy-duty excavators crawled slowly off the transport deck. Their thick metal treads ground mercilessly into the untouched earth. Flatbed trucks carrying stacks of steel fencing, temporary construction barriers, and advanced surveying equipment followed closely behind. It was a grotesque mechanical army, brought in to completely decimate my late wife's beautiful sanctuary. Following the heavy machinery, a sleek, black luxury SUV rolled off the ferry. It was a premium rental, clearly chosen to project an image of absolute, untouchable wealth to the dangerous men riding inside it. The convoy crawled up the dirt path, coming to a smooth, highly practiced stop just 50 yards from the edge of my cabin porch. The heavy diesel engines idled loudly, sending deep vibrations through the ground beneath my sturdy work boots. The doors of the luxury SUV swung open. Julian stepped out into the crisp ocean air. He was dressed in ridiculously expensive designer outdoor apparel. It looked completely untouched by any actual physical labor. A pristine leather jacket, spotless denim jeans, boots that had clearly never seen a single day of actual mud. Vanessa emerged eagerly from the passenger side. She wore oversized designer sunglasses and a thick, luxurious fur-lined coat. She held an expensive artisan coffee in one hand and a remarkably thick roll of architectural blueprints in the other. Several other sleek rental cars pulled up behind them. A group of sharp-looking, highly arrogant men stepped out. These were not just traditional investors. These were the representatives of the Chicago Shadow Syndicate. They wore tailored wool overcoats. They carried expensive leather portfolios. They had come to verify their $8 million collateral. Julian and Vanessa were laughing loudly together, an obnoxious, victorious sound that completely poisoned the natural environment. Vanessa eagerly unrolled her large blueprints across the hood of the luxury car. She pointed aggressively toward the beautiful, dense pine forest lining the coast. She was loudly explaining to the nodding, impressed syndicate men exactly where the massive concrete foundation for the main luxury resort lodge would be poured. She gestured wildly toward the ancient trees. She enthusiastically described how she was going to completely clear-cut the timber to make room for a paved, commercial helicopter landing pad. Julian wrapped his arm proudly around her waist. He soaked in the admiring glances. They were reveling openly in their stolen glory. They were completely drunk on the powerful illusion of absolute financial dominance. I took a slow, highly deliberate sip of my steaming black coffee. The bitter taste grounded me against the cold morning air. I remained perfectly still in my wooden rocking chair, waiting patiently for them to finally look up. Vanessa quickly finished her passionate presentation. She rolled up the heavy blueprints with a sharp, dramatic snap of her wrist. She turned her attention toward the rustic main cabin. She pointed her manicured finger aggressively toward the wooden structure, explaining exactly where the heavy demolition crew should strike first. Her outstretched hand froze completely in midair. The bright, victorious smile on her face instantly melted away. It was rapidly replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. Julian closely followed her paralyzed gaze. His own arrogant, confident smirk evaporated the very second his eyes locked directly onto mine. He physically stumbled backward in pure shock. He nearly tripped over the uneven gravel. His face rapidly drained of all color until he looked completely pale and sickly. The loud, obnoxious laughter of the syndicate men died abruptly. They sharply noticed the sudden, terrifying shift in their host's demeanor. Julian and Vanessa stood absolutely frozen in the dirt. Their mouths hung slightly open in complete and utter disbelief. They stared at me as if they were looking at a terrifying, vengeful ghost that had just risen directly from the grave to haunt them. They genuinely believed I was securely locked away in some miserable, underfunded state nursing home, hopelessly confused, completely stripped of all my legal rights. Yet here I was, sitting comfortably on the front porch of the $25 million property they were actively trying to steal, calmly watching them with the steady, incredibly cold eyes of a man who held every single winning card. The absolute, paralyzing terror radiating from their stiff bodies was incredibly satisfying to witness. The invisible trap had officially closed tightly around them. There was absolutely no safe place left for them to run or hide. The profound shock that paralyzed Vanessa quickly dissolved. It was replaced by a frantic, defensive rage. Her manicured hands began to tremble, not out of guilt, but out of a desperate need to maintain control over the fabricated reality she had carefully constructed for the dangerous men standing behind her. She violently shook her head. She reached into her expensive handbag and pulled out a thick stack of legal papers. The forged general durable power of attorney. She took a bold step toward the porch. Her high heels crunched loudly against the gravel. She pointed her finger directly at my chest. "Arthur, what in the world are you doing here?" Vanessa shrieked. Her shrill voice echoed harshly against the timber walls. "You're not supposed to be here. You have absolutely no legal right to step foot on this property." She waved the stack of forged documents frantically in the air. She turned wildly toward the group of syndicate men who were exchanging concerned, lethal glances. "Do not listen to a single word this man says," Vanessa yelled to the crowd, her voice cracking with mounting hysteria. "He is incredibly sick. He is suffering from severe dementia. He has been legally stripped of all his financial rights. I have the official, notarized paperwork right here in my hand to prove it. He is a trespassing, senile old man." Julian remained frozen near the SUV. His eyes darted frantically between me, his screaming wife, and the heavy machinery idling loudly in the background. He was a coward, caught directly in the headlights of his own massive deception. Vanessa realized her husband was paralyzed by fear. She took complete command of the situation. She spun around. She marched toward the foreman of the excavation crew, a burly man in an orange safety vest looking incredibly skeptical of the unfolding drama. "What are you waiting for?" Vanessa screamed at the confused foreman. Her face turned a bright, unnatural shade of crimson. I am the legal owner of this massive estate. I am giving you a direct order to begin the demolition process this exact second. Tell your bulldozer operators to push straight through and flatten that cabin. Do not let that crazy old man stop you. The heavy diesel engines of the yellow bulldozers roared louder. Thick black smoke billowed out of their exhaust pipes. The ground beneath the porch vibrated intensely. The syndicate investors began to slowly back away toward their rental cars. They sensed the deep, fatal instability of the situation. They were ruthless criminals, but they did not want any part of a highly publicized property dispute while holding an $8 million illegal marker. Despite the deafening noise of the machinery and the frantic, hysterical screaming of my daughter-in-law, I remained perfectly, resolutely still. I did not raise my voice to defend my mental capacity. I did not stand up from my wooden rocking chair. I raised my ceramic mug to my lips and took another slow, deliberate sip. My absolute calmness infuriated Vanessa even more. "You're going to regret this, Arthur," Vanessa threatened, marching back toward the front porch. She was breathing heavily, clutching the forged papers to her chest. "We have the legal backing of a massive financial institution. We have $8 million securing this resort project. You're going to be locked inside a padded cell by the time the sun goes down." I lowered my coffee mug. I rested it gently on my knee. I looked at her with an expression of profound pity and absolutely zero mercy. "You talk a great deal about the law, Vanessa," I said. My voice cut through the roar of the diesel engines with sharp, undeniable clarity. "But you clearly have absolutely no idea how the law actually works in the real world." Before she could muster another venomous response, the solid oak door of the main cabin clicked loudly. The thick iron latch released. The heavy door swung slowly inward, revealing the dark interior of the house. The arrogant, triumphant smirk on Vanessa's face instantly died. Stepping out from the shadows of the cabin was Marcus Sterling. My cutthroat, highly expensive trust and estate lawyer looked absolutely lethal in a sharply tailored, dark navy suit that sharply contrasted with the rustic wilderness environment. He held a sleek leather briefcase in one hand. He adjusted his expensive silver-framed glasses with the other. He looked down at Julian and Vanessa with the cold, evaluating gaze of a highly trained predator who had finally cornered its desperate prey. But Marcus was not alone. Following closely behind him, stepping out onto the wooden planks of my front porch, was the local county sheriff. He was a tall, incredibly imposing man wearing a crisp, authoritative tan uniform. His hand rested casually, but purposefully, on the heavy leather gun belt wrapped tightly around his waist. Flanking the formidable sheriff were three heavily armed, remarkably serious-looking Federal Bureau of Investigation agents. They wore dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI emblazoned across their backs. They fanned out across the porch. Their sharp, unblinking eyes quickly scanned the crowd of syndicate men, the loud construction crew, and finally locked directly onto Julian and Vanessa. The sudden, overwhelming presence of formidable federal law enforcement instantly drained whatever false courage Vanessa had managed to summon. The loud, aggressive roar of the bulldozers abruptly ceased. The highly confused foreman hastily signaled his machine operators to kill their massive engines. A heavy, suffocating silence rapidly descended upon the island, broken only by the gentle, distant crashing of the ocean waves. The balance of power had shifted in a matter of mere seconds. The arrogant wolves who falsely thought they were leading the hunt had just realized they were standing directly in the center of a perfectly designed, inescapable cage. Marcus descended the wooden steps of the porch with the smooth, unhurried grace of a man who knew he held absolute control. He stopped just a few feet away from where Julian and Vanessa were standing, completely paralyzed in the dirt. The syndicate representatives muttered nervously among themselves. They took another collective step backward toward their luxury rental vehicles. Marcus slowly opened his sleek leather briefcase. He reached inside and extracted a thick stack of official legal documents, securely bound by a heavy blue seal. He held the crisp papers up high, ensuring that every single person present could see the prominent federal insignia stamped across the front page. "I am Marcus Sterling, primary legal counsel representing the sole owner of this estate. Mr. Arthur Pendleton," he announced loudly. I hold in my hand a binding federal court order signed by a federal judge less than 24 hours ago. This document officially nullifies any and all current claims to this land made by anyone other than my client. Marcus lowered the packet slightly, fixing his piercing gaze directly onto Vanessa. "The piece of paper you are currently clutching in your trembling hand is not a valid legal instrument. It is a clumsily fabricated forgery born from a deeply arrogant and highly illegal conspiracy." Vanessa opened her mouth to protest. The words completely failed to materialize. Marcus turned his attention to the crowd of syndicate men, making sure they understood the monumental legal trap they had just stepped into. "The document these two individuals presented to your financial backers was originally a highly restrictive, short-term medical proxy," Marcus explained, his tone echoing with lethal professionalism. "We have irrefutable, high-definition video and audio evidence proving that Julian Pendleton and his wife intentionally altered that expired document. They willfully forged my client's signature. They committed severe federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and monumental real estate fraud." The air in the driveway seemed to instantly freeze. The syndicate men looked at Julian and Vanessa with absolute disgust and mounting, murderous horror. They realized they had handed $8 million to two desperate, sloppy criminals. Julian began to physically crumble under the crushing weight of the sudden exposure. His breathing became incredibly shallow and erratic. He clutched his chest, his eyes darting frantically around the property. He was hyperventilating, taking short, desperate gasps of the crisp mountain air. His knees buckled slightly, forcing him to lean heavily against the hood of their rented luxury vehicle. "But that is not the most catastrophic error you made," Marcus continued smoothly. He drove the final nail directly into their coffin. "A simple title search by a legitimate bank would have revealed the truth. But you bypassed banks. You went to the shadows." Marcus turned to the syndicate representatives. "This entire 1,000-acre island was placed into a strict federal conservation easement 10 years ago by the late Clara Pendleton. A federal conservation easement legally and permanently strips all commercial development rights from the property in perpetuity. That means this land legally cannot be subdivided. It cannot be commercially developed, and it absolutely cannot be used as collateral for a commercial mortgage by anyone. Ever." The syndicate men turned pale. "The deed is permanently restricted," Marcus stated flatly. "The massive $8 million loan you secured 3 weeks ago is completely fraudulent. Not just because you forged the power of attorney, but because the underlying asset you pledged legally does not exist in the commercial market. The loan is entirely uncollateralized." The syndicate investors immediately began rushing toward their rental cars. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with a federally restricted property entangled in a massive FBI wire fraud investigation. But as they turned to flee, the sheriff placed his hand on his radio. "Block the ferry ramp," the sheriff commanded into his shoulder mic. "Nobody leaves the island." The loud construction foreman swore under his breath. The heavy flatbed trucks and yellow bulldozers began shifting into reverse, eagerly abandoning the contaminated job site. The devastating reality finally began to penetrate Vanessa's thick skull. Her jaw dropped open. The fraudulent documents slipped from her trembling fingers, fluttering aimlessly to the dirty ground. But the nightmare was far from over. I stood up from my rocking chair. I walked down the porch steps. My boots crunched deliberately against the gravel. I walked past Vanessa's flailing arms and stopped inches in front of my son. Julian was leaning heavily against the SUV, his face a portrait of sheer, unadulterated panic. I looked him dead in the eye. I searched for any lingering trace of the little boy I had once loved so dearly. I found absolutely nothing but the hollow, terrified gaze of cornered thief. "You really thought you had outsmarted everyone," I said. My voice was eerily calm against the backdrop of the silent ocean. You thought stealing $8 million using a forged document was a brilliant business strategy. But you forgot one very important detail about your mother. She was always 10 steps ahead of you. Julian blinked rapidly. He tried to speak, but only a pathetic, raspy wheeze escaped his dry lips. Before your mother grew severely ill, we sat down with Marcus. I continued. We knew that you were completely consumed by a toxic, insatiable greed. She desperately wanted to ensure that you would never have to struggle. So, she made a very specific, deeply secretive plan. I watched Julian slowly raise his head. His tear-filled eyes widened with a sudden, painful realization. Clara liquidated several of her highly profitable private investments. I explained slowly. She placed exactly $15 million in pure, unencumbered cash into a heavily fortified, deeply private blind trust. She designed the trust to automatically transfer complete ownership of the entire balance directly into your personal bank accounts on the morning of your 40th birthday. You were already a multimillionaire, Julian. You just had to quietly wait a few more years. Julian stared up at me with eyes so wide they looked as though they might shatter. He was trying to process the magnitude of the fortune he had just learned about. $15 million. Clean, legal, waiting for him. But Marcus stepped forward, holding a pristine, cream-colored folder. The last will and testament of Clara Pendleton. Evelyn was not just generous, Marcus said. She was also profoundly realistic about the darkness taking root in your character. She explicitly instructed me to construct an unbreakable legal fail-safe. The character clause. Marcus adjusted his glasses and looked down at the heavy parchment paper. The clause explicitly states that if Julian Pendleton is ever found guilty of committing any act of elder abuse against his father, Arthur Pendleton, the trust is immediately voided. If Julian attempts to forcibly evict his father from his primary residence or fraudulently mortgage the island estate, the entire $15 million balance is instantly and permanently redirected. Marcus looked Julian directly in the eyes. She designated the Chicago Children's Hospital as the alternate beneficiary. And because you explicitly conspired to evict your father, forged a durable power of attorney, and fraudulently mortgaged this exact property, you have unequivocally triggered every single violation listed in this clause. Marcus closed the folder with a sharp snap. As of 8 a.m. this morning, the automated legal triggers were permanently activated. The entire $15 million was immediately routed to the hospital. The transfer is completely irrevocable. The money is entirely gone, Julian. You will never see a single penny of it. The sheer, staggering magnitude of his own stupidity finally crashed down upon Julian like a collapsing brick wall. He had eagerly traded a guaranteed, legal $15 million fortune for a fraudulent $8 million loan that was currently destroying his entire life. He had literally set fire to his own massive inheritance. Julian let out a visceral, agonizing scream that tore from the very bottom of his soul. He violently clawed at his own hair. He rocked back and forth in the sharp gravel. He was in a federal prison. He was millions of dollars in debt to a violent syndicate. He had lost his home, his cars, his career, and his father. Beside him, Vanessa snapped. She realized she was officially shackled to a bankrupt felon carrying a massive mob debt with zero inheritance. She let out a scream of pure fury. "I want a divorce," Vanessa shrieked. She backed away from her sobbing husband as if he were a disease. "I am leaving you. I am done with you." Two FBI agents immediately sprang into action. They rushed forward and grabbed Vanessa by the arms. She thrashed and kicked violently. "Vanessa Pendleton, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud," the agent stated coldly. The sharp click of steel handcuffs engaging echoed across the valley. Another agent hauled Julian up from the dirt, slapping the cuffs onto his wrists. Julian didn't even try to fight. He just wept. "Dad, please," Julian begged. His voice was muffled by his tears. He looked at me with pathetic, desperate eyes. "Please save me. I owe $8 million to those men. They are going to kill me. Please fix this. I looked at the weeping man standing in cuffs at my feet. I did not offer comfort. I did not offer forgiveness. I simply reached up and adjusted the collar of my flannel shirt. "You're not on the list, Julian," I said. My voice sliced through his hysterical sobbing like a razor-sharp steel blade. "There was a mistake. Go home." I turned my back on him. I walked slowly up the wooden steps of the cabin. I did not look back, not even once, as the federal agents dragged my screaming son and his wicked wife toward the waiting patrol cruisers. The justice system moved with remarkable speed. Within 6 months, Julian and Vanessa were sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The shadow banking syndicate